Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first of the parallel sessions of EU Industry Days on the second day. My name's Phil Cole, Director of Industrial Affairs at Wind Europe, and it's great to be with everyone in the room and those making their way in, and also those joining us online from all over Europe. And this is the whole point of EU Industry Days. The European industry for wind energy is a pan-European approach, and I'm delighted to be joined by three speakers from across the industry to talk about some of the key questions we have on wind energy at the moment. To my left, Tim Dawidowski, COO and Chief Sustainability Officer from wind turbine manufacturer Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy. Jose Luis Blanco, CEO of Nordex, wind turbine manufacturer, and Rafael Solis Hernandez, Public Affairs Director and Community Relations Director at EDP Renewables. Thank you very much for joining us today, and for those in the room and online for joining us as well. I'll quickly start off before we dive into the questions, because there's so many areas for us to cover during this discussion, with some quick stats on where we are today on wind energy in Europe. So today there is 256 gigawatts of onshore and offshore wind installed in Europe, and that's total Europe, not just the EU 27, which is made up of 224 gigawatts of onshore wind and 32 gigawatts of offshore wind. Now, Jose Luis, I'd like to start off with you with the first question, if I may. So the European Commission and the IEA, the International Energy Agency, is calling for wind energy to be the key delivering technology for a Green Deal that's also made in Europe. Now, we also have to achieve the renewable energy goals. It doesn't just come down to manufacturing, it's also being able to achieve those goals through installing what we need. You've recently been elected as the chair of Wind Europe, the trade association representing the wind industry right across Europe. Could you outline for us where the industry is today?
Thank you very much. That's very interesting questions. I think you name it. First, from a target perspective, we are set, we are good. I think the European Union increased the targets 3 times, from 27 to 32, now 42. And this translates, as you mentioned, in 420 gigawatts of new installed capacity by 2030, which is doubling the size of the market in just 7 years ahead of us. So basically, if we look at the targets, it's a blue sky. It's fantastic. We are set with the targets. However, the market dynamic is different. Is lagging behind, and although some member states and European Union have pushed forward regulation to accelerate permitting is still a bottleneck. So we can have great targets, but if we as a society and as a government do not produce permits to install wind turbines on and offshore, the targets are not going to be met. So it's very important to somehow accelerate the permitting process in all member states first. So we need market. The second is price. The price cap in some member states are not helping investors' confidence. So it's important to have clear market dynamics with clear rules, so where market participants can play and can take their investment decisions. So investor confidence is key. From an economic point of view, supply chains in Europe face amazing challenges, and legislation needs to be put in place to figure out how to deal with this global cost pressure and weak market dynamic. We need to address, or legislation needs to address, the cost of manufacturing in EU, the low market dynamic in EU, the supply chain dependencies, in particular single source, like dependencies from China, and why not the unfair competition from Chinese competitors. Due to this, the trend towards Asian supply chain continues unabated, and this, instead of reducing the dependencies from China, is increasing the dependencies from China. So the EU manufacturing and energy and interior security policy needs to be understood as a part of de-risking and strategy for Europe, like many other sectors, like defense, like 5G. There are many other sectors with a clear de-risk strategy for certain critical components. China, with the support from the government, they managed to create a huge monster. Economics apart, it's very difficult for us to understand how economics works, but the reality is that they have doubled the industrial capacity, and the industrial capacity in Europe are subcritical to counter deal with that situation. So, in summary, more permits, a fair market design, and industrial policy, and why not as well grid is going to be a key bottleneck for our industry.
Yeah. Thank you, Jose Luis, for that excellent overview, and there's many areas that we're going to touch on during the conversation today. Now, I forgot to mention one thing at the start, and I know for those online it's really key as well. We want to make this an interactive session, so hopefully behind me, there we go, you'll be able to submit your questions on Slido, so please go on to slido.com, enter the code, and we're in room 1, and we'll take some questions about halfway through. So please feel free to throw those questions in, and we'll get to them as we move along in the conversation. So Tim, moving on to you now. So we heard a little bit there on some of the situations in the supply chain. Now, key to us hitting these renewable energy targets in Europe is being able to produce as much as we can here in Europe to be able to source what we need for our own projects. Could you talk to us a little bit about the situation in the supply chain for wind energy, and sort of where we are today and maybe what's happened over the past few years?
Okay. Happy to do so. Thanks for the question. Warm welcome also from my side. The situation we are in is a delicate situation, I would call it. As Jose Luis rightfully said, we have a very, I would say intact market dynamics from a market perspective. The blue is sky, the sky is blue, so to speak. But if you look a little bit inside, then it looks different. We have a very bizarre situation. There is no industry in the world which got so many attention. There's no industry in the world which got so many support from governments, policymakers, politicians, and other stakeholders. There's almost no industry in the world which is so needed in order to, let me say, manage the energy transition and meet our climate goals as well. And at the same time, there's no industry in the world where the main players on the manufacturing side suffer tremendous losses. Alone in 22, the major Western European manufacturers have accounted for 4.7 billion losses. 4.7 billion losses. So you can see there is a mismatch between what we talk in public, and we are full of joy because of the growth potential and all the greater good we're going to achieve moving forward. At the same time, the ones who need to make it happen are standing at the cliff, almost right before dying. That's reality. And if I look to what has brought us into that situation, I would mainly name 3 areas, and that would support already what Jose Luis was saying. Visibility on projects is related to permitting, speed and acceleration. As a company, you need to have visibility in order to make decisions on resource allocation. It's good that we talk about potential, that's all fine, and we are not lacking of potential. We are lacking on concrete projects which will be tendered and we can bid on, and where we have visibility not just 12 months on the onshore side. Offshore is a little bit different. We need to distinguish, I believe, between the segments. But on the onshore side is pretty limited. I don't know what we're going to do in 3 years onshore. I have no idea. We have scenarios and plans, but we don't know. That means also we will not gear up our decisions around that. First point. Second point is we have a mismatch. We have seen a situation where it was a fierce race to drive the cost down. Levelized cost of electricity was the key word. And at the same time, we were jumping into new technologies continuously with always continuous shorter life cycles and introducing new technologies. And why we have done that is because the mantra is and still was that with a greater turbine, we're improving levelized cost of electricity. By that, we can participate in the bidding, and we have to introduce new technology in order to be successful. There are also players in the market who have benefited from that scenario, because if you can see, the cost went down over many, many years. At the same time, this combination of driving costs down to the point where you cannot breathe anymore, while taking all the risk on board with introducing new technology, is as committing suicide. And that's the reason why we are in the situation where we are, and that needs to stop. And that has been caused also by the fact that the whole auctioning system and the whole design of the system is basically comparing two natural numbers. It couldn't be simpler. Right? And all the other stuff which we would like to consider as well are not part of the decision-making process. Coming back to China, that's my third point. China has created huge overcapacity. 50% of the market is being in China. If they spoil over their capacity they have into the European market, and we continue in making decisions based on comparing two natural numbers, then that will be the end of the manufacturing in Europe for the wind industry, for sure.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a very clear message there, I think. You know, we're at risk now of potentially starting to lose the industry that we need to have here in Europe. You mentioned one of the areas around the need to see clarity of projects coming in and orders coming in. Rafael is a major developer of those wind farms. You are one of the people giving those orders to the supply chain. So I was wondering if you could give us a quick overview of where we are today on the policy that allows you to build those wind farms. Do you have the clarity, and frankly, what's happening?
Okay, so thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for inviting me to Malaga. You know, I was living here for many years, so I feel like at home. Before getting into the policy environment, I would like to follow the path of my colleagues to explain from the developer point of view how complex is the situation nowadays. You know, and I will highlight 6 points. You know, some of them already mentioned already. So the first one will be the inflation. I mean, you know, we have seen this. This is not only something that is happening in the renewables industry, but all around. And this makes our CapEx go up, you know, and also the OpEx, you know, is more expensive to operate, to carry out the operation and maintenance of wind farms. First point, inflation is a barrier, is a challenge. Second one, and connected to it, is the competition, you know. Competition could be good, but from the point of view of the developer, we have seen that in the past 5-6 years, we have not only utilities and companies from the industry, but also the oil and gas industry, the funds investing on the sector, and this makes more competition, and this take the prices down in the tenders for CFDs that we have in different markets. So we have more cost, less revenues. Okay? The third point, already mentioned, permitting, how not? You know, we have a huge bottleneck there. Probably we'll have time to tackle that, but I'm not saying that we have to speak about examples of offshore, as you were saying. We have been, for a decade, for 10 years, developing projects in France, the UK. This is just crazy, you know, but we have been for 10 years developing projects. But in the onshore wind, we take between nowadays 3, 5, 6 years, as we were saying, and this is way up above, you know, the 2 years mandate of the European Union. Fourth, the grid. I mean, it's clear that we need some improvements on the grid, and we'll have time to speak about that as well, but this is for sure an issue. The fifth point would be the cost of capital. I mean, you know, interest rates are going up, so our CapEx, in turn, are going up as well. And last but not least, and this is surprising to me, the NIMBY movement. I mean, sometimes in Europe as well, this is happening also in other places of the world with more aggressively, but in Europe it's happening as well. There is some people that doesn't want to have wind farms and solar farms near to the places. So this is the the reality that we are facing in the, as a developer in the renewable industry is a complex situation. It's not easy. It's not everything blue and happy and nice. With that being said, with that environment, and coming down to the question, environment and policy, I would say that there are some good news, let's be honest, and that not only in Europe, but also in the United States, Canada, Japan, because there are some policies, fostering the energy transition. And that is good. I mean, let's be honest, and we have, for example, in Europe, the Green Deal industrial plan, that tackle more or less all the topics that we are mentioning, speed up the finance, the skills of the workforce, the predictability and of the regulation schemes, etc. My only point, and I will finish with this because then we'll have time to comment probably, is that we see a gap between what are the, let's say, the guidelines, the mandates of the European Union and what is really happening at a member state level. Mm-hmm. We would like to see, let's say, a cross-border, reality in Europe so that the investors will feel more secure when investing in Europe.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. And that leads us very nicely actually onto the next question, which is about the financing and the funding that's available to wind energy today. Jose Luis, maybe you would like to jump on this point and tell us a little bit about where are we today in terms of being able to access financing and funding from EU institutions like the European Investment Bank, the European Commission. In the plenary session this morning, we heard about how important it is to have the right financing available. Is it available?
Well, not yet. Let me elaborate on that. I think traditionally, EIB and Europe was more focused on innovation. And what we are discussing now, today, is not about innovation. We have already very competitive state-of-the-art products that can deliver fantastic value to society in bringing electricity, reducing the dependency, bringing energy independence, and reducing the cost. The issue is the balance sheet situation of the market participants, and the issue is the size. So, Ting named it, the whole sector was and is operating in substantial losses. This means that the whole sector is burning equity. This has an immediate effect, that the financial sector starts to look at the sector as with question mark. Say, well, is this sector going to translate the blue sky targets into a profitable business sector where everybody can make a living, yes or no? And until the answer is yes, we better are cautious about the support we provide to the sector in terms of capex to ramp up and prepare, mainly the offshore industry for everything that is needed, and second, guarantees. So if our balance sheet is shrinking because we are losing money as a sector, and we need to double the activities, our balance sheets are not prepared.
Yeah.
And the guarantee lines are not prepared. It's not only about capex support, it's risk-taking, risk support for our mission to support the energy transition. So I think, and we expect as a sector, that the new legislation takes this situation into account, because availability of project bonds, because when we win a project from our customers is requesting from us, rightfully so, performance bond. And a performance bond in the onshore industry is a 2-year duration, but in the offshore industry maybe it's a 5 years duration. And then you need to scale up the industry 3 times.
Yes.
So you need 3 times, multiply 5 times. So it's massive amount of warranties that is going to be needed to make the targets plausible and realistic and achievable. And today, the financial sector is not willing to support that. So we count on European legislation, we count on member states, we count on EIB to take this into consideration, so we prepare the sector to address the needs of society. With the current setup, I see this is as bottleneck as the permitting or as many other key points in our industry.
Excellent. I think sort of what you're, very clearly explained there was this sort of mismatch between expectations and reality, particularly when it comes to financing. And Rafael, if I could go to you, I'd like to sort of, on the same sort of point, is there currently a mismatch today in Europe when it comes to the development of wind farms between what we're being asked to do by the policymakers versus what we are able to do based on the policy that's in place?
Yeah. So probably better to explain with examples. So I will tackle 3 examples to see the mismatch that we have. From the mandates that we get from Europe and what we actually see and suffer, in the market state. So let's start speaking about the caps, the electricity caps, the energy caps for inframarginal technologies. That the mandate from the European Commission was to finish with this in June 2023, June this year. However, we are seeing that countries, member states such as Poland or Romania, still have those in place, and sometimes with poor quality clawbacks implementation. And this, it's a big issue for developers like us. Another example could be, for example, in Italy, the decree that is now being approved is called Are Idonee. Probably I pronounced it bad, but basically it's more connected to solar PV, but you cannot use more than 10% of the surface, agricultural surface, which makes very difficult, to cope with the PNIEC, with the national plans of energy, of renewable energy. This also applies to Spain. I mean, this 10% and in some regions 5%. So, or for example, coming back to Romania, the imbalancing cost. I mean, we know that in Romania we have, because of the system, because of the grid infrastructure, we have around 15-20% of imbalancing cost in the industry. As a matter of fact, the Romanian Wind Energy Association is working on a report on that, but you cannot deduct more than 5% of those imbalancing costs. So this has a huge impact. So all in all, we see that in the different member states, you have different barriers, different legislations that is having a huge impact on the certainty of the investment. So what we claim, I mean, we have seen some positive things, like some flexibility in some markets when it comes to the deadlines. Also, they call the unique approvals after 6 days. So we have seen some improvements on this field, but we believe that there is still some room for improvement, on this, let's say, permitting issues that we're finding.
Okay, so clearly some challenges ahead and lots for us to get right, but some progress being made, it sounds like. Tim, coming back to you and staying on this topic of policy mismatches, so there's a major piece of industrial policy coming through at the moment called the Net Zero Industry Act, which is asking Europe's wind energy manufacturers to be able to produce 36 gigawatts of onshore and offshore wind combined by 2030. Are things heading in the right direction for us to be able to do that?
Well, let's look to numbers. The good thing about numbers never lie, right? So in 22 last year, I think if I'm not mistaken, we have built in Europe 16 gigawatts. 16. That's basically half of what we need to do over the next years in order to meet those targets you referred to. So the question is, how and why suddenly that should take place, right? Rightfully, you could have some doubts. The wind industry always has been good in driving costs down, has been and will be a competitive source, and is a competitive source even if you look to coal and fossil power plants. So there shouldn't be any doubt that the wind industry is a major pillar in order to make that happen. As a matter of fact, there are not that much industries left beside the wind industry which could have the same impact. So there shouldn't be any doubt. As José Luis at the beginning rightfully said, so we don't need more targets, obviously, right? So more targets, different targets, more aggressive targets doesn't make the trick. targets are good, ambitious, fine. That is all good. But let's look to reality. If you look to some of the auctions which have taken place, then you will figure out there are auctions without winners and bidders.
Yeah.
Why? So the auctions are supporting the targets, right? But nobody has been awarded. Why? Because of financial conditions didn't play out, because of inflation compensation was not part of the deal, because of negative pricing, bidding pricing in some of the auctions, because of an unbalanced risk profile, I would say more generic, across the whole value chain. That has led to the fact that, irrespective of the auction itself, nothing will be built. At the same time, we had auctions with winners, where due to long permitting and other things, suddenly on the developer side, the business case obviously was deteriorating over time because of inflation, and nobody has planned for a pandemic, nobody has planned for a war and all of that, right? So inflation has gone up dramatically, and by that they have withdrawn some of the projects because they're not vital anymore. So in this respect, having that said, we are really welcoming the initiative being announced by President von der Leyen in September for the wind power package. I think it's a tremendous opportunity if we do it right, if we address the right points, which we might come to later on in the session. I think jointly with the already existing Net Zero Industrial Act, it's a tremendous opportunity we have to still frame, I would say, the condition needed in order to make the wind industry and the target successful. So bringing in sync what we would like to see from an energy transition and climate perspective for Europe with what are the needs of the ones who need to realize that. And if we do it right, I think then we have a good chance to avoid what the PV and solar industry has seen, meaning by the end, no industry in Europe left.
Well, I mean, again, a fantastic challenge there to the policymakers with all this policy that's coming through at the moment. Now is the time to get it right. Thank you for that, very much for that, Tim. Jose Luis, maybe coming to you, because whilst we're having all these good conversations about industrial policy at the moment in Europe and finding the right route forward, we are now seeing drastically increasing competition from non-European manufacturers of wind turbines. How do we match those two aspects when you have President von der Leyen, as Tim said, calling for our clean tech industry to be made in Europe, and we see this increasing competition, often at levels that we struggle to compete with ourselves? How do we go from here?
That's the key question, because energy independence is great. We suffer in the continent the pain of being addicted to the Russian pipe. So we want to de-risk energy independence, and we are a key pillar as an industry to diversify and to have autonomous, long-lasting energy supply. But energy dependency with supply chain single source is not that independent. So we need to, or legislation needs to address that from a de-risking point of view. So energy is becoming vital for our society. The supply chain to produce energy is vital for our society. So from a framework, I think is clear. So the question is why the industry should manufacture in Europe, and this is a strategic question for Europe to answer. And if we end to the conclusion that this is strategic for Europe, then you need to provide a levelized playing field for European companies to invest in Europe. Otherwise, the trend is going in the completely reverse situation. We were talking about strengthening the supply chain requires predictable volume, more volume, auction design, market design, but as well criteria, like in many other sectors we have. We discuss in Europe about 5G. Is this a critical to national security technology to de-risk the dependency. We talk about defense industry. We talk about many sectors where public money needs to support the independence. And now we have a wonderful opportunity to make this reality, creating a levelized playing field where European companies can invest, where we, OEMs, can convince our suppliers to invest in Europe, because today the compelling proposition is devastating. Why should I invest in Europe to produce a product that cannot compete against the subsidized product from China? But this is again a very strategic question. Is from being addicted to the gas to being addicted to the low cost, subsidized in a non-levelized playing field for a single source country. And if we get it right, it will be a wonderful opportunity to stop the bleeding of relocation, then start the journey of reshoring. But for that, policy is needed, qualification criteria are needed, like cybersecurity, environmental, social governance, human rights. So there are many aspects that needs to be taken into account in the policy to put the right value that our sector brings to society. Is de-risking society. If society wants to be de-risked, if society doesn't want that, then we need to bear the consequences of being single source.
And I think that's a very important point you've made there, that we don't just end up moving from one dependency to another and struggling when it comes to being able to source what we need and manufacture what we need here for what we need in Europe. Maybe moving back to you, Rafael, because you mentioned a little bit, and the other speakers have as well, around some of the challenges we're seeing around grids at the moment. So often when we talk about permitting and permitting delays, it's mostly around the projects themselves, building those wind farms. But we do see major issues when it comes to connecting and getting the permit to connect those wind farms to the grid and other renewable types. What can be done about this? And maybe you could also give a little bit of how much of an impact you see from those delays to grid connection, to your ability to build projects.
Yeah, I mean, for us, for EDPR, I would say that this is, if not the most challenging issue that we have nowadays, one of the most. I would say that it's at the level of permitting, or even, above that. So the grid is something, it's a huge issue, a huge challenge. How can we solve this? I mean, there are many ways, but I would break down three. The first one is investing in infrastructure. I mean, this is for sure, and not only at a DCO level, but also at TCO level. So this is, something that we have to do in Europe if we want to, really drive on the energy transition. But then there are also, and this you can do both things at the same time, other ways. So for example, maximizing the grid that you have nowadays. And this you have the model of hybridization. This is a reality nowadays in Spain, in Portugal, but there is a lack of regulation in other markets in Europe. So, I think this is space for improvement there, and this is a way of taking advantage of the connection points, being more efficient, and also offer to the market and to the consumer a lower price energy, because you are using or taking advantage of the substation and the infrastructure that you have in the already existing farms. Also, in this point, repowering, and probably taking some overcapacity in the actual wind farms is another point to take advantage of the actual grid. But then the third point, in my opinion, is something that actually our neighbors and ex-colleagues from the UK are doing nowadays, and is that using the storage, meaning that if you create some kind of payment capacities, that allows the storage to come into the commercial system, this will also, improve it will take advantage in a better way of the existing grid that we have. So, I mean, all in all, I would say that this challenge, and following a report from the Euroelectric that I have read lately, is a challenge that is a 400 billion challenge. So it's a lot of money that we have to put there,
Yeah.
But it will have a lot of, let's say, benefits for society, not only in terms of sustainability, because we will emit less CO2 to the atmosphere, also in terms of economics, because we will create jobs, create local economies, also in terms of customer empowerment, modernizing the net, and also being more competitive, because we'll use better the grid that we have. So I think this is a must, and this is something we should do now. Yeah.
And it's so important we don't end up making improvements on the permitting process for the wind farms and then being stuck.
Yeah.
As you say, being able to just connect that to the grid. That seems crazy to me. Thank you for that. To the room and those online, I'm going to ask one more question and then we're going to jump over to some of the Slido questions. So now's your time if you've got a question or two you want to put to the panel to get onto Slido, or we'll also take some questions from the room as well. So no issues there. Tim, coming back to you, I'd like to sort of get you to focus a bit more again on financing and funding options that are available. It's so important if we want to have a clean tech and particularly wind energy manufacturing base here in Europe that we have the right financing instruments available. Are they available? And if they're not, what needs to change?
I think they are not available, not to the point which is really needed. Right? But there are possibilities. I mean, it's not that it's totally out of reach.
Yeah.
Right? We need to understand once again, and so that we are not mixing up things, we need to distinguish a little bit between onshore and offshore as well. Right? On the onshore side, I think we don't have in general a capacity issue. Right? We might have the need to invest here and there, but also here the products are getting bigger, and that might call for some investment. On the offshore side, it's totally different. Offshore is tremendously growing. We see it in the projects as well. And people need to understand, and I think there is what that means, right? When you invest into a blade factory, I think people are lacking of a picture what it means, right? A blade is nowadays easily 100 meters plus, let's say a soccer field, right? And if you then move a blade, then you need 20 to, let's say 20 soccer fields for a plant. Just for moving blades around. Space is costly.
Yeah.
So it's not just the building itself, which might have 800 meters to a kilometer, so there you don't walk anymore, right? Because then you would be too slow, right? So it is a tremendous investment. And that is all taking place in premium spots, meaning coastline, harbor access, directly, because you cannot move anything anymore, whether it's a blade or a nacelle. A nacelle is a nice luxury, I would say, 3-story, one-family house, weighing 600 tons plus. This you don't move on the street any longer. So this you move short distance on the shore to the ship, and then off you go. That costs a tremendous amount of money. It's not just the building. It is the infrastructure related to that. It is on the developer side, then also what they need to think about is ships, ship infrastructure, harbor. On our side, the facilities. It's not just the building. It is, you need to have the tools also around. And this costs money. What we need, and now Jose Luis has, if you look to the balance sheet of all the companies, we simply don't have the money. It's very easy. It's like at home. You cannot buy when you don't have the money. That means it will not happen. I don't know whether this is really understood. It will simply not happen because we don't have the money. It will not happen to the extent needed in order to support all that growth. For sure there will investment happen, but only to the limit which is somehow still viable and doable. And the potential out, we will not be able to do so. In other words, we don't need loans, we don't need mental support, we simply need cash, grants, direct funding in manufacturing extension in existing sites or in greenfield projects. First point. Second point was referred to, and I'm saying that since we are a little bit heavy on the offshore side, right, and with the long cycle projects, 5 to 6 years, I mean, we have guarantees out where most of the people would get pale if we would spill out the number, right?
Yeah.
And meaning there is a limit also from a banking, from a financing perspective on those guarantees. And if we cannot provide guarantees, my colleagues to the left most likely don't like that. And they said, why should I take the risk, right? So I'm looking for someone then. And I think this is something easy to resolve. The European Investment Bank could jump in and provide those guarantees, I believe. That would help a lot.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tim. And you know, the European Investment Bank lending policy, of course, is based on the EU priorities. So we should be in a situation today where there's a lot of clarity, but I think we're not seeing that, and we do need to get there, certainly, as well as your points on guarantees. So I'm going to jump to some questions from the audience via Slido. I think we might have a question or two in the room. So if you wouldn't mind, just, I don't know if there's a microphone somewhere. Just a quick introduction of yourself and then your question, that would be great. Just coming your way here.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, all right. I'm Dirk Finke from Aggregates Europe, UPG. I put a question actually on the slides, just probably went up to the top. Also, we are standing for the essential raw materials, because here at the Industry Days, we're talking a lot about critical raw materials and strategic raw materials, which is a few. Actually, if you look at the list, this is really a very small percentage of all the raw materials needed. And 2 weeks ago in the German Parliament, there was a hearing which made clear that for wind turbines only, if the German government would like to obtain the Energiewende, the transition towards renewable energy, they may need 3 million tons of sand, gravel, crushed rock for the steel reinforced concrete, the base foundation of wind turbines. So only for that, not infrastructure, not everything, 3 million tons now. But the permitting takes 5, 6, or 8, or 10 years. So my question is, are you aware of that? What is Wind Europe doing about that? Are you joining the Essential Raw Materials Coalition? Because that might be the real cost and the real delay, on top of all the delays you just mentioned.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And on the Wind Europe point, I'm very happy to catch up on it later, but I think we'll stick with the speakers. So when it comes to, again, another permitting issue, it sounds like here, you know, so yet again, another industry that we rely on, and there are permitting problems. Who would like to, Jose Luis?
I think we can interactively address the question. I think we are. I think the first and utmost important priority for policymakers, talking specifically about Germany, was permitting. And you know, you can always do better, but it's amazing the transformation in the German ecosystem, all hands on deck, everybody supporting, accelerating the permits, and hopefully this will not be an issue in the near future. I'm quite optimistic about how Germany as a country address the lack of permits. Auctions were undersubscribed, so the country reacted together. No big disagreements in the political point of view, no big disagreements in society, get it done. So quite optimistic. But then comes the next bottleneck, which is road transportation. I mean, the infrastructure was built after Second World War. And we are struggling to install 2 gigawatts a year. Imagine that we need to install 8 gigawatts. So massive bottlenecks in highways, bridges, police escorts. And then the next bottleneck will be sand, and will be cement, and will be, yes, but we need to tackle in parallel, but one after the other. And I must say that talking specifically about Germany, I'm quite happy to see how all stakeholders are working together to address and remove the challenges. And I'm sure that if permits for quarries or permits for cement plants can become a bottleneck, this will be addressed. I mean, for me, the most impressive thing was the change in legislation, making climate change overarching and overriding public interest. So this was real game changer in how the country addressed the topics. Yeah. And I'm sure this will play a role as well. Hopefully I'm right.
Thank you, Jose Luis. Rafael, Tim, would you like to come in there?
Nothing to add from my side.
Great. So we have another question here, very often talked about, which is around auction design. This has come in from Kino. What specific changes do we need to see to auction design to help stop that race to the bottom that we have been in now for a number of years? Tim, would you like to?
Yeah, let me start off with that one. There's a famous example, right? If you look in Germany now, the latest auction in July, 7 gigawatt offshore, right, which had then a negative pricing.
Yeah.
A negative pricing. I don't know whether everybody knows what that means in practice. That means that the one who are bidding and awarded, might pay 1.5 to 2 billion to the German government in order to getting the license, operating a wind park, developing and operating a wind park there. What do you really believe who is paying for that? Right? It is, by the end, that will be pushed down the value chain. It's going to be ending up on our side on cost pressure. And by the end, if that's not going to be removed, the consumer is paying for that. So, I mean, this construct that we allow for negative pricing, where the government is basically earning money while the industry is dying, I don't get it. I think a very practical example. So I could add more, but José Luis.
No, I think there has to be a floor there, to avoid these kind of situations. Yeah. It's true that maybe there is a developer that is taking a zero price because there is let's say, a framework in which you have different assets around, and the overall theme makes sense, because nobody works for nothing. It's very clear. Sure. But I would agree on changing the regulation and the schemes in order to have some floors and avoid these kind of situations. I mean, I totally agree with him. Yeah.
Okay. And maybe just sort of connected to that, maybe José Luis, I mean, you mentioned about the criteria in auctions. Obviously, it's a really important part as we move forward and again, try and move away from this race to the bottom on price. Anything you might want to add there around other criteria that can help that situation?
Oh, I mean, price is definitely one criteria, but you need to have other qualification criteria in our view. What is the risk of having these pieces of equipment with many controllers? Yeah. That cybersecurity, data residency, what we discussed about ESG criteria, so generating a levelized playing field where made in Europe is not penalized by the cost of made in Europe. Made in Europe is, by definition today, more expensive because we have higher cost and we have no subsidies. So we need to generate a levelized playing field where made in Europe is not penalizing participants in the ecosystem. Of course, first priority is more volume. Second priority, not penalize the made in Europe. Third priority, it was mentioned, financial instruments to de-risk the current situation in the marketplace to get the job done. Otherwise, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah. Exactly, thank you for that. I just want to check, is there any other questions in the room? If not, we'll take one more here. No, not seeing any hands, that's okay. So there is one question here, I'm conscious of time, that I would like to make sure that we answer, maybe a quick answer. Do you think, and it might be a long answer to a short question, do you think that manufacturing in Europe can ever be profitable again?
Well, if the right conditions are in place, it needs to be. Of course. Because otherwise,
it would exist.
we will be this will be a disaster for the continent. Yeah. Disaster. I mean, something so critical for our way of life, something so critical for the society as we know it, being dependent from a single source, that's not a nice position to be. This is way worse than the oil and gas, because in the oil, yes, we had the Russian pipe that was very competitive. That's not any longer available, but you have diversification of supply, so you can manage. You don't have all eggs into the same basket. If that doesn't happen in the green industry, and the supply chain keep moving away from Europe and moves away to a single country, this will be a huge geopolitical mistake, in my view.
No, just adding on that, from the side of the developer, I mean that, but I think, in Europe, we are world leaders, in the renewable energy sector. We have companies that are, the biggest in the world. This doesn't happen in other sectors. I mean, in some of them, but really little. Therefore, I think we should take this into account, especially not only coming to the wind sector, and try to keep this, because we are not only exporting products, but also know-how and other kind of things globally. So I think it's for the good of the whole continent. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you for that, Rafael. I think there was one other quick question I'd just like to quickly put to you, Tim, if I could. This is a question around employees and getting the workforce that we need, just before we move on to the last section. Very quickly, do you see any issues with attracting the talent that we need to the industry right now? And looking forward, particularly for offshore wind.
Oh, that's I have to say, a broad question, right? Because it depends a little bit on the country where you are. I would say in general, the wind industry is attractive, specifically for young people, because young people would like to change the world. So we have, I would say, coming myself from other industries, I've never seen an industry which considers themselves as so purpose-driven than the wind industry, and that attracts young talent, no doubt about that. So that's a good news, I believe. It's a good news. But at the same time, it goes without saying, depending where you're sitting in Europe or in the world with your network, yes, you have challenges here and there sometimes to acquire simply the quantity then needed, right? So if you're building up a factory and suddenly you're hiring 1,000 people, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, then it is a challenge, no doubt about that, right? Because you don't build a factory in Madrid, in Brussels, or in Berlin, right? You usually in areas where the population is not as big, and also where you need to attract certain qualification levels, which is also related to universities and other educational institutions, and that is here and there a challenge. But in general, I believe the industry is attractive.
Great, and that's great to see, and I know that when I go and visit academia and research centres, there's a lot of people really excited, as you say, about joining the wind industry, so that's great to see. So we've got time for maybe one more question to each speaker, and it'll be the same question to all of you. We've mentioned it already slightly today, but recently President von der Leyen announced the wind power package, and we're hoping to have some news over the next 2 weeks or so on the contents of that, extra support for the wind industry. Now, what I would like to ask each of you, in perhaps 2 minutes sort of answer each, is what do we need to have or see in that package that will allow wind energy to continue to be the key delivering part of the Green Deal, and that it's made in Europe? Jose Luis, would you like to kick us off?
First is volume, predictable volume that we can all prepare to deliver. The second is the resilient criteria. The Net Zero Industry Act have a very clear resilient criteria, so made in Europe doesn't get penalized by the fact of being made in Europe, but to the contrary, value in the contribution to diversification, to supply chain independence, to support energy independence, energy security, and energy cost in the continent. And third, it was mentioned as well, be aware of the current financial situation of the sector, be aware of the mission that is out there in front of us to do, which is massive, and be aware that our balance sheets are not prepared. So temporary financial instruments in names of loans, in names of guarantees, performance bonds and so on are going to be needed until we manage to transition the sector to a profitable situation that is desirable. Hopefully will happen the sooner the better, but it's not imminent.
Yeah. Thank you, Jose Luis. Tim, same question to you. Wind power package, what do we need to see?
Project visibility and permitting, I will repeat that until the last policymaker cannot stand that any longer and is changing that in the policy that it will finally happen. And we have an example in Germany, I think rightfully made, right? How the pressure has come up in order to get there. So that is good. Then we need to stop the race on these, cost down, technology up. And that is very much related on the design criteria, how we are putting together, let me say, our auction system. That needs improvement, has been addressed. I would say, financial criteria need to be part of that, beside other stuff. Then for sure we need the funding. I think I've made that hopefully clear also in the picture, what is really needed beyond what everybody's doing already. We need direct funding, we need grants into manufacturing extension, beside the guarantees also mentioned. And then we need to remove some of the financial burdens we have in the system. So we have negative pricing we have mentioned, but also I would stress a little bit more, and I think here that would help our developers as well, inflation compensation. I mean, you cannot predict anymore 5, 6, 7 years down the road what your cost position will be in the uncertainties we are living. Those times are gone, and we need to have a fair risk sharing in this respect. And then on the policy side, yes, I think we can do more also bilateral and a level playing field. That is what I expect. We are not fearing competition, but we would like to have competition on the same basis.
Excellent. So we've heard there from the supply chain and what we need to see come out in the next 2 weeks. As we said at the start, Raphael, and it's the last question to you, you've got to build these projects. What do you need to see?
No, I would agree, with what my colleagues said, so I will agree on that. I just adding maybe 3 topics that we have been speaking during the conversation. First of all, trying to reduce this gap between, the European mandates and guidelines and what is happening at the member states in terms of regulations, in terms of permitting and so on. Then the grid, we need some investment in grid, otherwise, this won't be possible. And we have been speaking also about other solutions, to maximize the grids, such as the storage or the hybrids, etc. And then last but not least, this may sound like a cliche, but a stable regulation. We have seen a lot of emergency measures, in the past couple of years with poor implemented clawbacks, that some of them are still running, and we need, stable, predictable regulation so that we, to invest in renewables, we need some certainty in the future. So.
Thank you. So I think we've had very clear messages there from the supply chain, from the developers on what we need to see in the wind power package. This really, comes back to energy security for us, as we've talked about, making sure that we don't continue to almost defeat ourselves on being able to achieve what we need to in terms of our political ambitions. So that's the end of the panel for today. I'd like to thank everyone in the room and the many people online for joining and taking part. It's been fantastic to have you with us. And to the panelists, Tim, Jose Luis, Raphael, thank you for joining us. And enjoy the rest of EU Industry Days. Thank you.
Thank you.